The alcohol inks I'm using today are from Let's Resin, Indigo, and Rosewood. The chrome powder is Champagne. These were my starting colors. But that didn't last long. Once you begin, color loyalty tends to disappear. Other inks and powders naturally find their way in. This is an unconditioned square of Sculpey Primo translucent clay. When making your cuts, avoid cutting all the way through. The goal is to create crevices that trap the alcohol ink so it dries inside the cuts. This forces the dye to diffuse outward into the surrounding clay rather than sitting on the surface. I've already added indigo ink to these cuts and let them dry overnight. That part didn't get recorded. Now I'm making additional cuts on another side. Temperature matters. The room and the clay will directly affect your outcome, both for cutting and diffusion. I typically work in 72 degrees. If needed, I'll warm the room slightly. You want the clay firm enough to handle without cracking, but not so warm that your cuts lose separation. I tend to grab whatever is nearby and let it evolve. Being mindful of how deep my previous cuts were, so I don't compromise the structure. Small bottles with fine nozzles work especially well here for controlled application. I bought some. I clean the surface with alcohol so I can clearly see my cut lines. Each time I cut and add material, I let it sit for a few hours until completely dry before continuing. If you keep working while it's wet and the clay cracks, the color will bleed and your design will become muddled. The bar needs to be compressed back into a solid form. This requires slow, consistent pressure to fully seal the cuts before any manipulation. Once the bar is fully recompressed, you can manipulate it however you like. In this case, I moved into a cut and designed slab. Rest time controls diffusion. The longer the clay sits, the more the ink spreads. If you want finer lines, cut and bake sooner. If you prefer a more diffused look, let the bar or even the cut shapes rest before baking. This technique allows you to create internal designs that can be stretched, reduced, or sliced, similar to a cane, to reveal patterns like florals or other embedded imagery. It also gives you control over how much diffusion or bleed becomes part of the final design.